What's up, guys? Hope you're having a good day. We've got a pretty good fight night card taking place this weekend. These low-key fight night cards that not many people really care about tend to be our bread and butter. We perform really well on them in live betting, and so these are the kind of events that I like to get stuck into, because you know there aren't many people out there willing to put in the level of time and work that we do into researching these fights, and the research is where we get our edge for live betting. As many of you will know, we make a profit on about 68% of fight night cards when it comes to UFC live betting. So we do really good live betting events like we've got to look forward to this weekend, headlined by Perez and Nicolau. So I'm hoping that you're going to be able to use the information in this video to make better betting decisions, maybe even earn some extra cash. And we're obviously going to be going into a lot of detail on each of these main card fights. Before we do though, I'm really sorry I have to do this and waste the time of most of you watching this, but I'll make it very quick. Whenever I say that I'm betting someone in a YouTube video and that bet loses, I have an army of people waiting to basically rush to the comment section of my next video and call me a clueless idiot fraud who knows nothing about the sport, and I should have known better. They told me so, all this kind of stuff to make fun of bets that I lost. So I just have to quickly go into this, because obviously in the last YouTube video I said that I was betting on Jamahal Hill and Arman Tsarukyan. Now, even though the title, the thumbnail, the video talks about reasons why I'm betting both Tsarukyan and Hill, because Hill lost, I know most people rush into the comment section will basically ignore the fact that Tsarukyan won just to kind of call me a clueless fraud that doesn't know what the fuck he is talking about, which is really annoying. But it is what it is. I just wanted to show you the betting tips page of my website, because obviously I placed two bets on that card. One on Tsarukyan, one on Hill. I did say in the breakdown video for the Jamahal Hill bet that it was a risky bet. I explicitly stated that I capped Jamahal Hill at around 60%, which isn't that much better than a coin flip. I said it was a risky bet, but I said that I felt, for all the reasons we covered in the breakdown, Hill gave us a really good risk to reward ratio, which I still believe. And if Hill and Pereira were to fight again next week, you know, say that fight got cancelled, well, it's a bad example, right? Because people will be like, oh, Hill got knocked out, how could you bet him in a week's time? I wouldn't, he'd just been brutally knocked out. But say Hill and Pereira fought in 6 months' time, I would still bet Hill at these odds. I think a big problem in MMA and betting on sports is people can't understand that Pereira and Hill could fight 10 different times and have 10 different outcomes. Just because Pereira punched Jamahal Hill really hard in the face on that night doesn't mean on another night, you know, Hill wouldn't have done more of the things we expected him to do. Anyway, I digress. Point being, we lost a bet on Jamahal Hill, but because he was a risky bet, I only bet a unit on him. Tsarukyan I felt was a much safer bet, so I bet 2 units on him. So the Tsarukyan win covered the Jamahal Hill loss, so I roughly broke even on the card. For pre-fight betting, we made a small profit live betting. This is a strategy I like to use a lot. You can see on the Allen versus Curtis card last week, we had 2 bets, a risky one on Dan Argueta, but I felt it was a really good value bet at underdog odds, considering how tough of a debut a guy like Argueta is for a guy like Matsumoto, whose takedown defense looked a bit dodgy in the past. So I placed a risky bet on Argueta, a much safer bet on Norma Dumont. The risky bet unfortunately lost again, but Dumont won relatively comfortably, again to put us pretty close to break even on that card. And it's a strategy I also tried to use earlier in the year on this Duplessis Strickland card, where we had our relatively safe bet on Jasudavicius, made half a unit on that. And then my logic for the bets on Strickland and Mayra Bueno Silva was that I felt Strickland and Silva had pretty big advantages in those matchups, and they both had a pretty good chance of winning. But I felt the reasonable worst case scenario for these two fights was that I'd go 1-1. You know, maybe Silva won and Strickland would lose, or maybe Strickland would win, Silva would lose. But I felt, worst case scenario, I'm probably going to go 1-1 on these two. And with the profit on Jasudavicius, that would put me 2-1 overall on these 3 bets. And any combination of going 2-1 on these 3 bets would have either put me in a decent profit if Strickland won, or close to break even if, say, Jasudavicius and Silva won. That's not what happened. The worst case scenario happened. Strickland and Silva actually lost their fights. But this is like a strategy I use a lot. So if you see me make a breakdown video, you know, like this, and I say I'm betting on 2 fighters, and, you know, you're not a member of my website, so you don't have access to exactly what I'm doing, just know that if I've said in a breakdown video, I'm very, 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 very confident this guy will win, and then I say in the other breakdown video, like with Jamal Hill, it's a risky bet, but I think it's good value, just like Hill, just like Argueta, I'm probably betting more on the safer bet to cover a potential loss on the riskier bet. And sometimes that backfires, right? But it's just a strategy I like to use over the years. It's just something I like to do. So just to get that out of the way, it's really, really annoying that I have to waste everybody's time talking about this stuff just to appease the jabronis that love to, for whatever reason, criticize every single bet that I lose. It's very annoying. So, like, if we look at my football betting group, for example, you know, say I lose a bet on, I don't know, Pogan Schnetzin versus Pearce Gleivis in a similar odds range to Jamal Hill last weekend. You know, no one says anything. You know what I mean? Like, I bet just as much on Pogan Schnetzin. In fact, I bet more on Pogan Schnetzin than I did on Jamal Hill. But no one cares if I lose this. Like, no one says anything. You know what I'm saying? It's just, it's a bit frustrating. The worst I have to deal with is a couple crying emojis from people in the group. It's all good. But it's like, I've placed 27 bets on football this month. We've won 16 and we've lost 11, which puts us at an overall profit of about 3 units, something in that odds range, or something in that profit range. And it's like, yeah, I'm a professional gambler. I'm going to lose a lot of bets, but the whole goal of being a professional gambler is you just, over the long term, win more bets than you lose, and you make an overall profit. You're going to lose bets along the way. It's just hilarious to me when people want to make such a big deal out of individual losses when I literally make a profit at basically everything I do betting sports that I have done for so many years. It's just, it's kind of silly to me. But anyway, let's now move on to breaking down the first fight that I want to get into on this card, which is actually a pretty interesting main event between Matheus Nicolau and Alex Perez. So what we're going to do is start off by taking a look at the odds on this one, and I am going to hit refresh so we get the latest odds, and they've split up the main event odds into their own little box here. Okay, so Matheus Nicolau is the favourite at average odds of around 1.53, which is going to be minus 189 for an implied probability of 65%. We take a look at the odds on Perez. He's around an average of 2.55, which is going to be plus 155 for an implied probability of 39%. So Perez is 32 years old, 5'6" with a 65.5-inch reach. And Matheus Nicolau is 31 years old, 5'6" with a 66-inch reach. So both guys roughly the same age, roughly the same size. No notable X factors really on this one. So this is an interesting matchup because I personally believe that Alex Perez is probably better than Matheus Nicolau in every single aspect of MMA. And yet, Matheus Nicolau is the favourite, and he's quite a big favourite, right? His odds carry an implied probability of about 65%. So there's a bit of a paradox going on there, because you wouldn't expect a guy that is better than his opponent everywhere to be the underdog. But this one makes a little bit of sense, and I'm going to show you some footage for you to make sense of this too. So the way that I would break this fight down, just before we go into like the detail and the video footage, is I think Alex Perez is a significantly better grappler than Matheus Nicolau. I think Nicolau might have a slight advantage when it comes to striking, but not a particularly big one, and I don't think it will last for the whole 25 minutes. Like, Nicolau may do a lot better on the feet in the first 10 minutes, but the longer the fight goes, the skill gap when it comes to striking certainly shrinks. We'll get into the specifics of why I feel that way about this striking and grappling in a moment, but to summarise for you very quickly why this fight is an interesting one is because GSP famously said that fighting is 90% mental. It's all about that mentality, that consistency, that game planning, that strategy. I appreciate this myself. Betting on sports, it's all a mental game. It's easy to win bets. It's easy to develop profitable betting strategies. I don't think it's that hard as long as you put the work in. The difficult part is staying strong mentally, controlling your monkey brain, staying disciplined, not letting the pressure and performance anxiety of having to continuously win bets to grind a long-term profit. That's the hard part. It's your mentality. It's the mental side of the game. Because actually developing profitable betting strategies is not that hard. With Alex Perez, he's one of these guys that is a very high-level MMA grappler, a pretty good MMA striker, but he is very weak in the mental aspect of the game. And that feels horrible for me to say. I don't like to say that. But ultimately, it's my job to research fights and try to use the information that we've got to get our money into strong positions. And as a result, I've just got to say what I see in the research, right? So, the two specific issues with Alex Perez's mental game. The first really reared its head in the Mokaev fight, his last fight. And for me, the negative mental aspect, or the negative aspect of Perez's mental game, which reared its head in the Mokaev fight, was, I don't know if using the expression self-destructive tendencies is the best way to describe it. I'll show you some footage, you'll see it for yourself. But basically, there is a negative trait, some fighters have, which lack the mental game, where they just hold back to the extent that they're almost making fights intentionally close. This was something that plagued Bobby Green throughout his entire career. He's cleaned a lot of it up in recent years. Bobby Green's way better now. You saw how aggressive he was on last week's card against Jim Miller. But earlier in Bobby Green's career, you go back 5, 6, 7 years, there were these performances where, Bobby Green would clearly be far superior to his opponent from a technical point of view, but he would hold back a lot, not let his hands go, not really do very much to put his stamp on rounds, which resulted in fights being closer than they needed to be. And Alex Perez definitely has shown those tendencies throughout his career, and it was very evident in the Mokaev fight, and I'll show you some footage of that in a moment. The second issue with Perez is that he does have a tendency to quit in bad positions. He's one of these guys that if you hurt him really bad, or you get in on a deep submission attempt, or if he gets put in any kind of bad position or face any real adversity in a fight, he'll just quit. He's not like a Justin Gaethje who will have his nose completely destroyed, after round 1 against Max Holloway, and then fight for another 20 minutes and hang in there and get into exchanges, give absolutely everything that he's got to win the fight, despite being very badly hurt, especially with Holloway jabbing that nose for the entire duration of the matchup. That's not Perez. As soon as he runs into a little bit of adversity, he'll cave, throw the towel in, look for a way out. So those are two massive issues in the mental aspect or the mental game of Alex Perez, which has really held him back in his career. But skill for skill, he's really good. Like, from a technical point of view, he's really, really good. So I want to, because the mental aspect of the game doesn't really fit into his striking and grappling, I want to show you evidence of what I've just said, and then we'll discuss from a technical point of view how Perez and Nicolau match up. So the first thing we'll do, we'll get through the quickest part of the mental problems. Mental problems doesn't sound very nice thing to say. I don't mean that. I just mean the perhaps flaws in Alex Perez's mental game sounds better than mental issues, right? Okay. This fight was a long time ago, but the reason why I've picked this fight to show you is because it gives you guys the clearest, most obvious visual representation of what I'm talking about. So this is a very real issue for Alex Perez, and it's cropped up in many of his fights, but when it's cropped up in his other fights, it's less obvious, so it's harder for me to show you exactly the point I'm trying to make. So, you know, if you really want to bet this fight, go watch all of Perez's past fights, do your own research, see for yourself. If you haven't got time to do that, or if you trust my work, you could just watch what I'm going to show you and accept that this is a wider issue with Perez's overall package as a fighter, and it's not just something that strange has happened in this fight. So this is his fight from a long time ago against Joseph Benavidez. So what we're going to do is just, the fight only lasts one round, only lasts a few minutes. But what I want you to pay attention to is Perez's body language in this fight. Because like all of Perez's fights, he starts off doing pretty well, and he's confident, and he's moving well, and he's not really in any trouble. And then it's almost like this fight reaches a point where he realizes that Joseph Benavidez is tough and he's pretty good, and as a result, Perez almost starts to lose confidence in his own ability and almost starts to look for a way out, in my opinion. You know, early stages of this fight, he's looking confident, he's moving well, he's landing some decent shots, but every time he attacks Benavidez uses the deterrent of continuing to attack him in the future by blitzing forward and firing back with counters. And as the round progresses, you can see Perez just kind of break mentally and become progressively less confident. You see it in this is a sequence that's played out over and over again over the last minute and 20 seconds of this round, but you can see it in sequences like this, right? Watch. Perez attacks Benavidez with a body kick there, right? And then Benavidez immediately blitzes forward and lands a body shot and kind of gets it back, or punishes Perez for attacking him. And as the round progresses, you see Perez become increasingly more reluctant to attack Benavidez for this reason. You see it there. Every time he attacks Benavidez, Benavidez waits for Perez to go first. Benavidez immediately gives it back to him. So we'll play this first round in his entirety, because then you can really appreciate the point I'm trying to make. We skip through this sequence a little. There we go. Back to the middle of the octagon. Okay. Just trying to make this breakdown video not super long. Which is why I don't want to show loads of footage of this and make this breakdown super long. So midway point of the round now. And notice how Perez's volume's starting to just drop off a little. At the beginning of this round, he was very aggressive. He was constantly attacking Benavidez. He was throwing a lot of strikes. Now he's a lot more hesitant. In the last minute, he hasn't really thrown a lot, so he's far less aggressive here. And now he's reluctant to pull the trigger and attack Benavidez, because he knows every time he does, Benavidez is going to fire back with some counters and really commit to them and probably hurt Perez. And this little exchange here perfectly sums up the point I'm trying to make. If you think of, a couple minutes back where Perez was blitzing forward and fully committing to the punches and kicks that he was throwing at Benavidez, but after eating a lot of hard counters, Perez has got to the point where he's now reluctant to fully commit to his attacks, because he knows when he does go forward and really commit to attacking Benavidez, what's coming back at him is going to be a lot harder and a lot more impactful. So look at how hesitant Perez is with this next blitzing attack. Watch. Just throws like a kind of half-assed right hand, doesn't really sit down on it, doesn't really commit to it, and then immediately kind of backs off. Notice how that kind of attack, very, very different, and these kind of attacks, very, very different to the ones earlier in the round, where even here, where he's sitting down a little bit harder on this combination, it's different to earlier in the round, where Perez was just steaming forward in a straight line biting down on the mouthpiece and really letting his punches and kicks go. Here he's a lot more hesitant. He holds back a lot. Look, he's already retreating as Benavidez starts to come forward and counter. And then Benavidez kind of knocks Perez to the ground. And nothing's happened here, right? If we just play this sequence out in slow-mo, just so you can see everything that's going on. It's not like Perez eats a big shot and gets knocked down and badly hurt here, or there's a clash of heads or anything like that. Benavidez kind of just runs into him, right? There's a little bit of head contact there, but nothing major. So, look at the head, right? No major... like, he eats a left hand. He does eat a left hand before he gets knocked over. Watch. He does eat a left hand, but his body language after the left hand lands doesn't really say to me he's hurt here, right? Watch. Sorry, I rewound way too much. So he eats a left hand there for sure. But if you watch it in real time, his body language looks alright. He's alright here. He seems to be alright. He's got his legs under him. He's not wobbled or anything. Takes a big deep breath, but his eyes are still focused on Benavidez. After that, as Benavidez comes forward here, and we've got to do this in one take because I don't want to have to rewind too far again. So as he comes forward, right, there's a little bit of contact with the head, but nothing major. Benavidez's left hand is there. His right hand is there. So there's no shots landed. And it's not like Perez is kind of holding on to the part of the head where their heads kind of brushed up against one another. So I'll just put this back into real time. Right? And then for me, you just get weird submissive body language here from Perez, where he just kind of lies there, hanging onto this single leg, and just allows Benavidez to just hammer him. And then, so look at this, look at this. They just ran into each other, and he just goes belly down and lies there, right? Now, even if you look at these early shots, they're not really landing. They're kind of landing on the arm of Perez here. Look, kind of landing on the arm, right? So it's not like he's badly hurt here. Nothing's happened. Yet he's still lying there belly down. For no reason, really. And then the ref goes to stop it. I think he might be saying to Benavidez, be careful because some of these are landing on the back of the head. I'm not exactly sure what's going on here. But anyway, he doesn't stop it. The fight restarts. And then you're kind of thinking, okay, so that was weird. I don't know why I don't know why Perez went belly down there. He didn't eat any big shots to hurt him. His cardio's great, so he's not tired. So we're only 3.5 minutes into the fight. I don't know why he went belly down there, but luckily he got away with it. And now he can get back on track and work his way back into the fight, right? That's not what happens. He kind of just grabs back a hold of this single leg. And, like, just fucking doesn't do anything apart from put his head in between Benavidez's legs. And it's just all very weird, like, all very, very weird. All very weird. This whole sequence is very, very weird. Like, I don't exactly know what Perez is doing here. Just kind of hesitating in these positions, these half-assed single leg attempts. Not showing a lot of urgency to work through this position or scramble out of it. And there's a lot more of this in the Mokaev fight, which we'll be going through after this. Just kind of hesitating in this position. You know, and then Benavidez goes to the back and same thing. Just starts smashing him with ground and pound. And then he just goes belly down and just kind of gives up. Right? Just kind of gives up. Why is he going belly down there? It doesn't really make much sense. Very strange performance. And that's like the most clear and obvious example of the weaknesses in Perez's mental side of the game that I can show you. There are a lot of others, but that's the clearest. And obviously, if you want to bet this fight, do your own research. Watch all of Perez's past fights. You'll see the others for yourself. But now what I want to do is show you a bit of the Mokaev fight. Well, actually, I'll skip through the Mokaev fight and show you some critically important parts. Because I think what we just saw there was Perez realise around about the midway point of round one that he couldn't beat Benavidez and then cave mentally, quit and look for a way out. I think that's what happened. Something different happens in this Mokaev fight, which also shows issue with not having the strongest fighter mentality. And so, if you go back and watch this fight in the cold light of day, and I remember when we were live betting this fight, I was really, really, really tempted to live bet Alex Perez in this fight. I didn't. I decided not to live bet Alex Perez, but it was extremely tempting because during this fight, it was abundantly clear to me that Perez had the better gas tank and that Markaev was slowing down, and that Perez was causing Markaev problems both standing up and on the ground. But there were also a lot of red flags in this performance live where Perez was just, again, hesitating to work through bad positions, which is, you know, the mistake that we saw him make in the Joseph Benavidez fight that we just watched, right? So I'm just going to skip through this fight, and again, if you don't trust my work, if you think I'm some kind of clueless jabrontard, go do your own research, watch all of his fights. But this is a trend that you'll see playing out in a lot of Alex Perez's matchups. So, this breakdown video is going to be super long if I show you long sequences of striking. But take my word for it, Perez was causing Markaev some problems on the feet in this fight. And then for whatever reason, when it was clear that Markaev was struggling a little bit and getting tired, Perez just didn't let his hands go. He completely let him off the hook. So the general setup in this fight, if you want to go watch it by yourself, is Markaev was really struggling to obtain dominant positions on Perez with grappling. And Perez was outstriking Markaev. So Perez was more than capable of using his wrestling in reverse to keep the fight standing, outstriking Markaev on the feet and winning a stand-up fight. But instead what happened was he didn't let his hands go as much as he could have, even though he still outstruck Markaev. But the real thing that caused Perez to lose this fight was when Markaev would try to take him down, they would end up in these kind of stalemate positions. And Markaev didn't want to disengage from the stalemate position because he was too tired and he wanted to keep grappling. And Perez didn't disengage from the stalemate positions where he could have got the fight back to striking, where he could have won the fight. He just kind of did what he did against Benavidez and just hesitated, just holding on to single legs and things, which then enabled Markaev to kind of outwork him, even though Markaev did very little in this fight. So what we're going to do, we're going to skip through. We're going to show examples of this. So we've seen a little bit of striking here. You can see Perez is doing pretty well on the feet. And as the fight progresses and Markaev starts to tire, Perez does better and better on the feet. But obviously we're skipping through, and it'll be easier for you to see this the point that I'm making if you research the fight yourself. So you can see Markaev gets on some nice takedown attempts, but pretty much every time Perez's defensive wrestling is really, really good, and he just neutralizes the threat of Markaev's takedown. You can see one there, and it just continues to happen in this fight, right? You just kind of see it here. Markaev gets in on a takedown. Perez's takedown offense is pretty good. Markaev does get a takedown, but Perez is really scrambly. You know, scrambles over the cage, just generally makes it quite hard for Markaev to build too much momentum on the ground. I was right at the end of the round. But anyway, you can see in round one, Markaev had trouble obtaining dominant positions on Perez, and what happens is Markaev gets progressively more tired in rounds 2 and 3, and has even less success with his grappling than he just had in round 1. Like, you just get a lot of these positions, right? So round 2 starts. I'm trying so hard not to make this breakdown video super long, but I know it's already becoming super long. But hopefully you're appreciating it and you find it useful. So anyway, Markaev gets to Perez's back in a scramble early in round 2. Perez walks him over to the cage. Markaev slips off. So in rounds 2 and 3, we see a lot of positions similar to this, where Perez has done a really good job of defending the initial takedown, has done a really good job of preventing Markaev from obtaining a dominant position, because this isn't really a dominant position. Markaev doesn't have anything here really apart from a body lock. And this is where you want to see Perez show some urgency to start turning into Markaev, digging underhooks, and look to break Markaev's body lock and get back to the middle of the octagon, right? But he just doesn't really show that much urgency. He just kind of allows Markaev to hang on him here and run the clock down. And even though Markaev isn't doing much, not really inflicting any damage, not scoring a huge amount of points, he is obviously outworking Perez, and therefore in this position is currently winning the round. But what I would really like to see here from Perez is just some urgency to just slip this left hand underneath Markaev's, left arm and start to dig for an underhook. He's looking to break the grip of Markaev here. But for me, there's just so much hesitation in these positions. It's like here, right? Markaev doesn't have anything here. He doesn't even have his hands connected on a body lock anymore. Perez should be looking to immediately turn into Markaev and explode out of there and get back to the middle of the octagon. But he just kind of fucks about. He just kind of fucks about. And it takes him that 20 to 30 seconds to get back to the middle of the octagon here. So you're probably thinking, well, Chris is being a bit harsh here because he did actually break Markaev's grip, get back to the middle of the octagon. But what you see if you watch this fight back in rounds 2 and 3 is Perez just takes way too long to do everything. And because he takes way too long to do everything, Markaev is able to run the clock down and outwork him, across the second and third rounds for decent stretches and doesn't give Perez much time to score points on the feet. Had Perez showed a bit more urgency to do what we just saw him do, but right in the beginning when Markaev first got that body lock, Markaev would have really, really, really struggled in this fight. Like, you just see little things like here, right? Just another little example. And all these things add up in rounds 2 and 3. So Markaev shoots a takedown. Perez does an amazing job of sprawling out of it, right? But when you get to here, you've done the hard part, right? Markaev is nowhere near your legs. You're sprawling out of it. Why not just disengage from this position and stand back up? But he doesn't. He just kind of hesitates for a bit. Just kind of hesitates. And it's just everything is very laboured. Everything just takes a little bit too long. And you're probably, again, being like, oh, Chris is being too harsh. He's putting his body weight on Markaev. He's wearing him out. He's wanting to make real sure that Markaev can't drive in for a second time and get in on the legs. But for me, it's just a pattern in this second and third round where Perez just takes too long to do everything. So Markaev back in on his legs here. And Perez has obviously got to slip his legs out from underneath Markaev, get back up, which he's just done. And now again, he's got to try and break the grip of Markaev. Which would be far easier if he went an underhook on at least one side, just to put a bit of resistance on the body lock. At the moment, there's no resistance on the body lock other than Perez fighting hands. If he goes to an underhook on just one side, he can then use the power in one of his arms to put some resistance on Markaev's body lock. And then when he's fighting hands, he's just got a better chance of breaking Markaev's grip than if he tries to do it without overhooks. And so you can see he's just taking too long to work through this position. And then what happens? He gets an underhook and immediately manages to work out of the position. So that just kind of shows, like, why not go to underhooks earlier? Why try and fight hands in the way that you were? Why not just try to go to underhooks 20, 30 seconds earlier? Because what's happening in these rounds is Perez is struggling to build momentum because Markaev is just out hustling him. But the reason why Markaev is out hustling him is because Perez is taking so long to do the things that we know he can do. Like in this position, just dig underhooks. Just dig underhooks. And get your back off the cage, get back to the middle of the octagon where you can start to build some momentum on the feet. And he does eventually. Watch. Underhook there on the right side, underhook on the left side, and back to the middle of the octagon. But why take so long? Because what's happened in Perez taking so long to work through these positions is round 2's almost over, and Perez hasn't scored many points because Markaev has been smothering him in pressure. I just want to see more urgency from him. That's all. More urgency. So if we go into round 3 now, similar sort of story. Markaev shoots a takedown. Again, nowhere near it. And Perez just kind of holds onto his head. Keeps Markaev's arms at a safe distance from being able to get in deep on his legs. But I don't know why he's even messing around in positions like this when he was doing so well on the feet. For me, if I was in his corner, I would be screaming at him to just disengage and get back to the middle of the octagon. Because the problem with positions like this is, Perez is scoring from this position, but he's not scoring much. So if Markaev goes and gets a takedown immediately after this, it kind of trumps this small bit of control that Perez has. Whereas if Perez gets back to the middle of the octagon, with Markaev looking exhausted and starts hammering his legs with those leg kicks again and lighting him up with his boxing, does some damage, well then you start to score big. And then meaningless takedowns and grappling control from Markaev, they're not really going to weigh very heavily on the judges' scorecards. But he just fucks around. Like, what are you doing here? You're doing so well in the striking. Why not just disengage, get back to the middle of the octagon instead of messing around in these positions that Markaev wants to be on? And then inevitably, Markaev hits a switch, gets the back control, gets to the body lock, which Perez has taken so long to work through in this fight. And just again, we have to wait ages for Perez to just start working for underhooks to break the grip of Markaev. Just takes an eternity to do anything. Markaev gets the takedown, he's just out hustling him. And then eventually, Perez does turn into Markaev here. And gets back to the middle of the eye. I just want to see more urgency from him. For me, these are self-destructive tendencies where, like again, Markaev's in on a single leg here. Perez has stuffed it. And here it's like, what are you waiting for? Just holds onto the head. You're not really scoring from here. You know, he's been on your back. He's hit takedowns. You need to score points to win this round. And he kind of just holds on and waits for Markaev to make the first move. It's just, I don't know, man. Just a lot of bad fight IQ in grappling positions, you know? Like here, right? Markaev in on a takedown. You've got an underhook on this left side. Gets an underhook on the right side. Now get out of there, man. Why are you still messing around in here with these sprawls and stuff? Just get out of there. Get back to the middle of the octagon. Like, what's this? What are you doing? What are you achieving? You're not really scoring points here. Get out. Why are you here? You know what I mean? It's just all a bit... The fight IQ's not great. It's not great. For me, it's like self-destructive tendencies where he's making these rounds closer than they need to be. Like, just get out of there. Markaev's got nothing here. He's exhausted. Struggling on the feet. Like, why are you trying to, like, continue to grapple with this guy when you're not able to obtain dominant positions, you know? Like, again, here, Markaev shoots a takedown. Again, you effortlessly stuff it with the underhooks. Just get out of here now, right? Markaev's exhausted. It's a bad look that Markaev is exhausted in the eyes of the judges. Just get out of here, right? Go back to the middle of the octagon. Just takes an eternity. He waits for Markaev to make the first move. It's like, man, you should have won this fight because you are clearly better than Markaev everywhere. You outstruck him, you outgrappled him, but lacking urgency to work through. I mean, look at how tired Markaev is here. It's just lacking urgency to work out of positions like this and really punish Markaev on the feet. Cost Perez. Cost him bad. That's why he lost. So I didn't want this breakdown video to be this long for this fight. But the devil's in the detail. And it's important you know this. Because it's frustrating. And it's been a trend throughout Perez's career. Alright. So, after all that, I guess we better talk about how they actually match up when it comes to striking and grappling. Well, the real problem for Nicolau in this fight, well, he's got two big problems actually. The first problem is that I think Perez is a significantly better MMA grappler than Nicolau. And, you know, Nicolau might have the slight advantage when it comes to striking in the first couple of rounds. But Nicolau is a guy that tends to slow down a lot as fights wear on. Perez has got pretty good cardio. And so, with this being a 5-round fight, it's a pretty big issue for Nicolau that he slows down a lot as fights wear on. So, early in the matchup, if the fight is standing, what you're likely to see is Nicolau's a counter striker that's going to be bouncing around a lot on the outside, looking to chip away at Perez from the outside with leg kicks and very nice technical boxing combinations. And the footwork and the movement of Nicolau, because Nicolau does move well, he's very elusive, he's very good defensively. Perez will be landing the harder, more impactful shots, but I do think he'll struggle with the footwork and movement of Nicolau early on. But into that 3rd, 4th, 5th round, Perez actually lets his hands go. I think he can really start to cause Nicolau some problems because Nicolau slows a lot in the 3rd round of fights. And I think if Perez actually lets his hands go and gets rid of this mental block, I think Perez will do really well in the second half of this fight. In terms of grappling, because Nicolau does have pretty bad cardio, he wears down pretty quick if you make him grapple. So if you do see a lot of grappling positions, like we saw in the Perez versus Mokaev fight, I think Nicolau is going to gas very, very bad. And again, that opens the door for Perez to outwork him and out-grapple him. But again, Perez has got to be one of these guys that you know, shows a little bit of urgency to let his hands go and obtain dominant positions. So Perez is a really, 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 really tempting bet this weekend at underdog odds, because I do think he has all the skills in the world to win. I actually think he's good enough to dominate Nicolau and make this really easy. If both guys show up and perform to their full potential, I think Perez dominates. I think he's so much better than Nicolau, it's ridiculous. But it's very dangerous betting on guys like Perez who have those self-destructive tendencies, who don't let their hands go, who show bad fight IQ and a lack of urgency in certain positions. So it is hard to bet guys like Perez, but he's very, very tempting. Like, very tempting. I haven't decided yet if I'm going to be betting Perez. Typically speaking, I don't like betting guys with bad fight IQ, but it's very, 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 very tempting. I think you'd have to be fucking insane to bet Nicolau as a big favourite, if I'm being honest. I think he is a terrible bet in these odds ranges. I'm not saying he can't win. You know, with Perez's self-destructive mentality, he probably will win. Perez will probably beat himself and find a way to lose. How could you trust a guy that performed how he did against Joseph Benavidez? But if both these guys show up and perform to their full potential, I think Perez dominates this fight and makes it look very easy. So in terms of the over-under on this one, very likely the fight goes deep. We can see that Perez, even though a lot of his fights have ended very quickly, they've ended quickly under weird circumstances. And Perez isn't really that dangerous, doesn't really have knockout power. Nicolau, again, very much a decisionator, not that dangerous on the ground, doesn't really have much power in his hands. Both these guys are pretty much volume strikers, but neither of them are particularly dangerous on the ground. So yeah, pretty likely this fight goes deep. I am actually quite tempted to bet the over 2.5 rounds. Obviously we perform amazingly well on over under bets. I think we're something like 23 and 2 or 23 and 3 on like our last 26 over under bets, something like that crazy. I don't know the exact number, it's in that ballpark. But yeah, I'm very tempted by the over 2.5 rounds. I might actually go for this. I'll let you know in Discord if I decide to pull the trigger in the pre-fight betting section, and obviously on the website. In terms of the prop bets, I like Perez by decision quite a lot. 6.0 plus 500, that's quite nice. I also like Perez to win in round 4 and Perez to win in round 5. Now these bets aren't that likely to hit. They're super specific long shot bets, but the thing is, you don't have to win many bets in this odds range to make a profit long term, and with how much Nicolau slows down, If Perez is aggressive and really has that will to win and really goes for it, which he often doesn't, but if he does tonight, or if he does on Saturday night, it might be tonight, you might be watching this on fight day, but if he does really go for this, if he does show up, I think he likely stops Nicolau in rounds 4 or 5. You might want to sprinkle a bit on those. So those 3 props are actually pretty good. I quite like those. I won't be betting them myself because I don't like props. I don't bet props. The max bet limits are too low for me to really take that much of an interest in them. At least over here in Europe. Well, it might be different where you live in your country, but I quite like those 3 props. They're very tempting. But obviously over 2.5 rounds, that's going to have higher max bet limits. That one does interest me. I'd be surprised if it ended under 2.5 rounds. So that one, very, very tempting. Might go for that. And I will let you know on the website or on Telegram if you're a member of my community. So I hope you found that useful. Now let's break down the next fight on this card, which is going to be Bogdan Guskov versus Ryan Spann. So if we start off by taking a look at the odds on this one, we can see that Ryan Spann is in a similar odds range to Nicolau. We'll say an average of about, just call it 1.50, make it simple, which is minus 200 for an implied probability of 67%. We take a look at the odds on his opponent, Guskov. He's around an average of 2.60, which is going to be plus 160 for an implied probability of 38%. So Spann is 32 years old, 6'5", with an 81.5 inch reach. Guskov, 31 years old, 6'3", with a 76 inch reach. So both guys roughly the same age. But we can see Ryan Spann has a pretty nice 5-inch reach advantage. Now, it's always nice having a 5-inch reach advantage, and it does give Spann a bit of a statistical advantage of winning this fight just purely based on that 5-inch reach advantage alone. However, Spann's not really a guy that uses his reach particularly well. He tends to be one of these reckless sluggers that fully commits to everything that he throws, as opposed to one of these guys who's very technical and moves well and knows how to use his length. So it's nice having a 5-inch reach advantage, but Spann's not a fighter that uses it particularly well. And as a result, it's not a particularly big factor in how I assess Spann's chances of winning this matchup. So there are a few fighters on this card where there's not that much footage available on them, which makes it really difficult to form a strong opinion on how their fight, or this fight, is likely to play out. Guskov is one of them, because if we take a look at his record, we can see that every single one of his fights, dating back to 2019, has ended in round 1. So we don't really know very much about Guskov. It's one of those guys where he looks big and scary and hits very hard, but he's pretty much an unknown because we've got more footage available on him from like pre-2019, you know, in these fights where he went deep. But it's such a long time ago that he's likely to have improved so much since then that those fights don't really tell us a whole lot. And he looks absolutely dreadful in these fights that went deep, to be fair. Like if I bring them, if I bring a fight up that he went deep in, what can we grab? What can we grab? We can grab. So I couldn't find this fight online, but we could grab this fight. In fact, yeah, we can grab this fight. So if we pop this on, as I talk through the matchup. So Bogdan Guskov looks big and scary here. Very big and scary. He's got the tattoos on his back. So this fight is really the last chance we got to see Guskov. But again, the problem is it was all the way back in 2016, so it was 8 years ago. And he's likely to have improved so much since then. It was also only his 3rd pro fight, so we don't want to be too harsh on him. He looks absolutely dreadful in the fight, to be fair. Looks terrible. Ground game non-existent. Really, really bad. But yeah, man, you know, in terms of how I look at this fight from a betting point of view, this is a fight for the gamblers, man. This is a fight for people that like to play slot machines, roulette, all that sort of shit. For me, I just have no interest in betting fights like this, because if I don't know it, a good amount about a fighter, I just have no way to really predict how a fight is likely to go. And with all of Guskov's fights ending in round 1 over the last 4 years, we've got no idea how Guskov will look into rounds 2 and 3. Therefore, I don't really have an opinion on him. He's big, he's scary, he's strong, he hits very hard. This fight suggests his takedown offense is pretty bad, but we really don't know because we haven't seen it tested in the last 4 years. So we can talk a lot about Ryan Spann because we know a lot about him, but we can't talk very much about Guskov because we just haven't seen very much on him. So in terms of how they match up when it comes to striking, Guskov's definitely more technical than Spann. He moves a lot better. I mean, even here, though, you can see him taking big, deep breaths, right? And we're literally a minute and a half in. But anyway, Guskov's definitely the more technical out of the two. He moves better. Just more traditional, technical boxing. Spann's wild. He's reckless. He throws punches from the hips. He's bad defensively. He's just a slugger. The thing about Spann, though, is he does have a kill or be killed style. If you look at Spann's record, a lot of his fights have also ended very quickly. And Spann is one of these guys that tends to come out the gate very hard trying to kill you in round 1. And either he'll get caught in a bad position and finished, or he'll take his opponent out. And occasionally, one of his fights will go deeper. But generally speaking, he does have that kill or be killed style. And that's why Spann, picks up wins in the UFC, because he's 6'5", he's very athletic, he's got a nasty submission game, true legit knockout power in everything that he throws, he hits very, very hard. And so when a guy like Spann comes along that has absolutely no regard for his own safety, doesn't mind getting dragged into these kill or be killed type of fights, sometimes he's going to punch his opponent really hard in the face and knock him out, and other times he's going to get punched really hard in the face and knocked out. And that's just basically the kind of guy Spann is. And it's dangerous to bet on fights like that. My lean is Spann for sure, because we know more about him. We know his submission game is very nasty. We know he's got reasonably good cardio for a light heavyweight. We know that he's got big power. He's very aggressive. He's more proven. He's more experienced. But Bogdan could be very good. I don't think he is, based on how he looked against Oezdemir, but he could be very good. Who knows? Who knows? I don't. There's not enough footage available. People will gamble on this fight, but this one's not for me. So, from a betting point of view, oh God, what would I do? I wouldn't feel great betting Spann as such a big favourite. I don't know. I think both guys are very bad bets, because if you bet Guskov, you're basically gambling. You have no idea what his strengths and weaknesses are because there's no footage of them. If you bet Spann, you're betting on a giant, or not a giant favourite, but a pretty big favourite in a fight which you know is likely to be carnage between two guys that hit very hard and are probably pretty dangerous, and Spann's very reckless and he's been knocked out, wobbled, dropped a bunch of times. So neither guy is a particularly good bet. I'd probably still go Spann if you really, 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 really want to bet this fight to make watching more interesting. But if you actually like money, don't bet this fight, because this fight is just fucking chaos. So in terms of the over-under, obviously both guys are dangerous. Spann's bad defensively, has a kill or be killed style. Very likely this fight ends inside the distance. All of Bogdan's fights dating back to 2019 have ended in round 1. Most of Spann's fights over the last few years have also ended inside the distance. Very likely this one ends inside the distance as well, but the odds reflect that. In terms of props on this one, the only prop I would consider is Spann by knockout or TKO. But I'm not going to bet it because the odds are terrible. Very, very bad odds. But if you do want to sprinkle a little bit of money on a prop on this fight to make watching it more interesting, Spann by knockout or TKO is the only prop I would consider on this fight. So I hope you found that breakdown useful. Now let's break down the next fight on this card, which is going to be Silva versus Ariane Lipski. So whenever a fight like this comes along, it's always quite strange to me because we've got a Discord community. I go on Twitter and a lot of people are talking about this fight and trying to rationalize bets for this fight, and they're kind of giving strong opinions on, you know, how they see this fight going. And for me, discussing a fight like this again is a bit of a waste of time, because very similar to Bogdan Guskov, there's just no footage on Karine Silva. We don't really know what her strengths and weaknesses are. So again, if you like money, don't bet this fight. This is one of those fights for the guys that want to play slot machines, roulette, all that sort of stuff. There's no way to know what to expect from Silva this weekend. Unless you train with Silva or you've got inside information from Silva's camps, there's just no way to know what to expect from her this weekend. And as a result, it's just pointless betting the fight. I'll show you a little bit of footage in a moment to kind of show you why I lean towards Lipski in this matchup. But you've got to be very, very, very... I don't know why you would bet a fight like this, right? If we take a look at the odds, you know, Karine Silva, currently the favourite. Average odds are around 1.65, which is going to be minus 154 for an implied probability of 61%. We can see Lipski, the underdog, average odds of about 2.25, which is going to be plus 125 for an implied probability of 44%. Lipski, 30 years old, 5'6" with a 67-inch reach. Silva, 30 years old, 5'5", 67-inch reach. Both girls virtually identical in terms of the tail of the tape. They're even from the same country. So the problem you have with fights like this is there will be guys online that will put out really strong opinions on a fighter like Karine Silva. And ultimately, this is a fight where there has to be an outcome. Either Lipski's going to win or Silva's going to win. Just like if you spin a roulette wheel, the ball has to land on either a red or a black number. There has to be an outcome to this. This is a cage fight to the death. There will be a winner. Right? Problem you have with fights like this is people will bet Silva and they will give you these really strong opinions on why Silva's a great bet. And then when Silva wins, they'll be like, boom, called it, told you so. It was so obvious. Silva was a lock. I'm the smartest guy in the world. Blah, 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 blah. And if you haven't researched a fight like this, you'll be like, oh my God, that guy's really smart. Like, he did say Silva was going to do all these things that she went out and done, right? It's really smart. It's really cool. Right? That's what we get. But if you went to a casino, right, and a guy said, I'm putting 100 grand on the ball to land on a black number on the next spin, and the casino spun the wheel and the ball landed on a black number, would you be like, oh my God, that guy is so smart, like he just knew the ball was going to land on a black number, I need to listen to this guy, like he's really smart? You wouldn't, would you? It just, that was the outcome. That was what happened with the spin of a roulette wheel. Fights like this, very similar. Fights like Guskov, Spann, very similar, where we have huge gaps in information and we don't know what to expect from Guskov. He could be the greatest light heavyweight of all time. He could be the worst light heavyweight of all time. Same for Karine Silva. Could be the best fighter in the division, could be the worst fighter in the division. We just don't know. Because if you look at her record, again, similar to Guskov, dating back to 2019, all of her fights have ended extremely quickly. All of them have ended in round one. So if you bet Silva this weekend, you have no idea how she's going to look in rounds 2 or 3, which is a huge problem because this is a 3-round fight. So if you do bet this fight, you are totally gambling. You have no idea what's going to happen because Silva could go out, totally run through Lipski, make it look easy. She could be the next Amanda Nunes. She could be utterly incredible. She could be the future greatest female fighter of all time. She could also get punched really hard in the face, turn out to have no chin, just get knocked out. She could gas very bad after round 1, struggle really bad in rounds 2 and 3. Her grappling may look awful in rounds 2 and 3. You just really have absolutely no idea what to expect from Karine Silva. There's a bit of footage available on her, and we can make some assumptions based on the footage that we've got available. But we don't know because we don't have enough footage to give us, you know, a real clear indication of what to expect. The best thing we can do is look at her Contender Series fight against Kui Hu Yan. Probably butchered it. Always get shit for my pronunciation. I apologise. But the best thing we can do is look at this fight to gauge what level Karine Silva's at, what her strengths and weaknesses are, because out of all her fights in the last 4 years, it's the one that lasted the longest. Now, the problem with forming strong opinions based on this matchup is that this fight was also, almost 3 years ago, 2.5 years ago, and Karine Silva at 30 years old is likely to have improved a lot since then. Also, there's a lot of pressure with fighting on the Contender Series. Karine Silva's probably battling with a lot of performance anxiety, a lot of pressure. And so she probably didn't look particularly good in that fight because she was dealing with the performance anxiety and pressure of being very close to making it to the UFC, which is obviously probably a big dream, life-changing opportunity for her. But after she's had, a fight in the Contender Series, 3 fights in the UFC, she's going to be way more experienced now, way more comfortable under the bright lights of the UFC, way more confident with that UFC canvas under her feet. And she's likely going to look a lot better than she did back in 2021. But I do feel this fight gives us the best indicator of Silva's strengths and weaknesses. So let's fucking watch it, right? A lot of people talk about, how they think fights are going to play out and shit. Well, the only place you find truth and honesty in this game is in the fight footage, because it don't fucking lie. So, let's go through this fight. So this fight from 2.5 years ago. Silva's obviously in the Navy sports bra and shorts. So let's take a look. Let's see what we got. We'll just skip through it. I don't want to make this breakdown video super long, but I know this is a fight a lot of people are interested in. And so we will spend a bit of time going through it just so you can see all the things I've mentioned for yourself. So you don't have to question what I'm saying. Alright, so I'm just going to skip through. And you can see about a minute in, Yan gets a takedown. Silva gives up a really cheap takedown here. And then just gets the guard and just starts working for submissions off her back. Tries to go to the rubber guard. And for pretty much this whole round, she just attacks with like triangles, arm bars off her back. So she gets taken down about a minute into round 1. And then basically, I'm just going to skip through because I don't want this breakdown video to be super long. But she basically spends the rest of the round just hunting for long shot submissions off her back. Getting beaten up from top position with ground and pound. You can see she's quite bloodied up. As the camera pans around, she's quite bloodied up, wearing a bit of damage. There's some swelling. But she just has a very active guard. But she just attacks off her back. Doesn't really make any effort to get back up to her feet. Even in this position, where Yan postures up and gives Silva the space to scramble back up to her feet. Silva's been on the ground here for 2 minutes. When given this much space, I would really like her to show some urgency to stand back up. That's not what she does. She just kind of kicks Yan off her back. Does absolutely nothing. She kind of lies on her back doing nothing. Getting kicked in the legs. You really want to see a fighter scramble back up to her feet here, explode back up to her feet. She's not. And then Yan goes back into her guard. So Silva looking really bad here in my opinion. Just very, very weak off her back. All she wants to do is hunt for long shot submissions off her back and get punched in the face. So we skip through. And that's basically the first round. Silva gave up a takedown 1 minute into the round and then just basically lied on her back for the rest of the round, hunting for long shot submissions. Not really getting that close to any of them. Looking pretty awful. If we go into round 2, what you can see here is a bit of tired body language from Karine Silva. She's not working particularly, or she's not moving particularly well here. Body language very laboured. Hand speed very slow. Looking pretty tired. Very, very tired and sloppy. Big deep breaths. Tired body language. Heavy arms. Yada, yada, yada. Shoots a takedown. Doesn't get it. And then gets in on another takedown. Doesn't get it. Gets in on a single leg. Doesn't get it. Drives Yan over to the cage. Very nice drive on that takedown entry, but isn't that low on Yan's legs. It's going to be hard for her to upset her balance from a takedown entry that high up above the hips. So again, doesn't get it. And very tired body language here. Looking very sloppy on the feet. And then out of nowhere, Silva just kind of grabs hold of Yan's head, jumps guard on a guillotine, and gets a submission pretty much out of nowhere. She looks a bit shit to me, which is why I'm surprised so many people are on her this weekend. Now, she could have improved a lot since 2021. I'm sure she has. But based on that performance, there is no way I would be betting her as a favourite over Lipski, to the extent where I think she's a really bad bet. I think Karine Silva at these odds, after what you've just seen, is a really bad bet. So we obviously know a lot about Ariane Lipski. There's tons of footage available on her. We don't really know much about Silva. All I can do is make the best read possible, the best decision possible, the best prediction possible with the information that we've got available. So, how do I see this playing out? Well, Lipski's takedown defense used to be extremely bad. Her ground game used to be non-existent. Lipski was one of these fighters who, earlier in her career, had basically no ground game. She was very, very low level on the ground. You see her in the Muay Thai outfit here. She calls herself the Queen of Violence. We know Lipski is a striker with a base in Muay Thai. So her takedown defense, ground game, very, very bad. You see her losing via ground and pound in these two fights, right? In the past, if you would take Lipski down, which was pretty easy to do, and you put her in a bad position on the ground, which is pretty easy to do, she would just get overwhelmed. She wouldn't be able to defend herself. So this fight's an interesting one, because in the last couple of years, Lipski has made significant improvements to her takedown defense, where she's gone from having some of the worst takedown defense in the division to like above average, really solid takedown defense. Now that's good, but it's also problematic for us from a betting point of view. It's good because we know, based on the Yan fight, Silva's offensive wrestling's not great. And we know Lipski's takedown defense is pretty fucking good. So based on past performances, from what we've seen, Silva's probably going to struggle to get this fight to the ground, right? Lipski's takedown defense is probably good enough to cause Silva some problems. The real issue with betting this fight is because Lipski's takedown defense has improved so much, we haven't seen her ground game properly tested in quite a while. Because even though JJ Aldrich, Casey O'Neill and Melissa Gatto tried extremely hard to get her down, none of them managed to get her down for very long. And so we know her takedown defense has improved a lot, but we don't know what her ground game looks like in 2024. We know going back 3 or 4 years, Lipski's ground game was really, really, really bad, to the extent that if Silva gets her down, we know Lipski's going to be in a lot of trouble. But we have this disconnect where we could be really reasonably confident that Silva will struggle to get Lipski down based on what we've seen. But if Silva does get Lipski down, Lipski's likely in tons of trouble unless her ground game's improved a lot. Because even though Silva looks like a low-level Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu based fighter, she still has a nasty submission game. She's a strong girl. And even when she gets tired, you can see she's got a decent squeeze. We saw that in the Yan fight. She was looking exhausted. But it still takes a strong squeeze and a lot of energy to submit your opponent, off your back with a guillotine like that. So we've got to respect Silva's ground game. I think the issue with Silva is probably her cardio, low-level striking, perhaps not the best wrestling, which could make it difficult for her to get the fight to the ground. So, how's this fight likely to play out, right? I think the most likely way this fight plays out is Silva tries hard to get this fight to the ground, just like JJ Aldrich did, just like Melissa Gatto did, just like Casey O'Neill did. Probably fails. I think Lipski's takedown offense is quite likely to hold up here. And I think Silva will burn a lot of energy trying to get the fight to the ground. We know Lipski's cardio is very good. And I think Lipski will probably light Silva up on the feet, outstrike her, probably win a decision. That's, I think, the most likely outcome. But if Silva's improved her cardio, improved her wrestling a lot since that Contender Series fight, both things are very likely. A lot can change in 3 years. Then she might take Lipski down easily and dominate her on the ground. So that's why this fight is a total gamble if you bet on it. Because there's no way to be confident on either one of these girls. If someone is confident on either of these girls, they're either lying to you or they're lying to yourself. Because there simply is not enough footage on Karine Silva to have a confident read on how this one's likely to play out. May as well go play roulette. That's my view on it. Now, from a betting point of view, if you put your gun, if you put your gun to my head and said, who is the better bet out of these two? It's undoubtedly Ariane Lipski. Why? There's two key reasons. The first reason being her odds are better. So if we've got a situation where we don't really know what's going to happen, but we know that both girls are capable of winning, you're getting a far better risk to reward ratio for your money by taking the underdog, because if you bet $100 on Lipski, you get about $125 profit, whereas if you bet $100 on Silva, you only get about $65 profit. So in a situation where we don't really know what's going to happen due to a lack of information, you're much better off risking $100 to make $125 than you are risking $100 to make $65. I also think Lipski is the better bet here because we know more about her. She's proven, she's more experienced. We know her cardio is pretty good. We know what her strengths and weaknesses are. So in a fight like this where we don't really know what's going to happen, my opinion, better the devil you know. At least we know what we're getting with Lipski. And for all of her weaknesses, I'd rather know what I'm getting in a fighter than betting on basically a complete unknown. That's just my perspective. You might feel differently. So in terms of the over-under on this one, very difficult for me to bet an over-under on this fight because if Silva's not able to get the takedown, I think the fight is extremely likely to go over 1.5 rounds. Because Lipski's not that dangerous on the feet. She's more of a volume striker. So if Silva can't get the takedown, the fight's likely to go deep, with Lipski just kind of chipping away at Silva on the feet. But remember what I said 3-4 years ago, Lipski's ground game was terrible and Silva looks pretty dangerous on the ground. So if Silva does get the takedown in this fight, I could see her getting a quick submission, just like she's done so many times over the last 3 years, which is why it's so difficult to get a read on this fight, because Silva's made quick work of so many of her recent opponents. In terms of the prop bets, a few are interesting to me. Lipski to win in round 3 is interesting to me. Not super likely to win, but again, like we said with the Alex Perez bets, the Alex Perez props, you don't need to win a particularly high percentage of these bets in order to earn a good long-term profit. So that's interesting to me. Lipski by decision is also pretty interesting to me. 5.0 plus 400. If you wanted to sprinkle a little bit of money on this fight to make watching it more interesting, those are a couple of decent props for you there. I won't be betting them myself. I don't like props, but those are two I would potentially consider if I were you. So I hope you found that useful. Now let's break down the next fight on this card, which is going to be Austin Lane against Jonata Diniz. So if we start off by taking a look at the odds on this one, we can see that Diniz is the favourite at average odds of around 1.38, which is going to be minus 263 for an implied probability of 72%. If we take a look at the odds on his opponent, Mr. Lane, he's around an average of 3.10, which is going to be plus 210 for an implied probability of 32%. So Lane is 36 years old, 6'6" with an 80-inch reach, and Diniz, making his UFC debut, is 32 years old, 6'4" with a 79.5-inch reach. So both guys roughly about the same age, roughly about the same size, 36 years old, not crazy old for a heavyweight. So no real notable X factors on this one for me, other than the fact that Diniz is making his UFC debut. But he is quite an experienced fighter. You can see him in the glory kickboxing gloves here. He is from a traditional kickboxing background. You can see he's had a long career in glory. And we've seen guys like Cesar Almeida recently. Obviously, Alex Pereira have a lot of success coming from traditional kickboxing backgrounds. Israel, the last stylebender, Adesanya. He's also obviously traditional kickboxing background. Stephen Thompson, Michael Venom Page, the list goes on and on and on and on. So, I was quite excited to research Diniz to see what he's capable of, because even though his kickboxing career is a bit of a mixed bag, almost as many losses as wins. These guys that come from traditional kickboxing backgrounds are fun to watch, right? Cesar Almeida a few weeks ago looked amazing in his debut. I think he could be really, really special, and he's a middleweight. Can you imagine Almeida fighting Pereira one day? But anyway, Diniz is pretty good. Now, whenever I say stuff like this, whenever I make a statement like that, there will always be a small percentage of people that watch my videos that when I say someone like Diniz is good, will immediately jump down my throat, rush to the comment section and be like, Diniz sucks, John Jones would kill him, Tom Aspinall would knock him out in 3 seconds, blah, blah, all these things, right? Okay, I understand that when I say Diniz is pretty good, I'm not saying Diniz is a potential future champion, a top 10 level fighter. I'm not saying he can go out and beat Cyril Gane tomorrow. What I'm saying is, he's 6-0. He's only 32 years old, which is very, very young for a heavyweight. And for the level of heavyweight fighter we're talking about, in terms of, that lower level heavyweight type matchup, which guys like Austin Lane are going to be involved in, guys like Chase Sherman, guys like Jared Vandeira. For that level of UFC heavyweight, Diniz is pretty good. I don't know how far he can go, but for that like low mid-tier heavyweight type matchup, Diniz is pretty good. It's nice to watch him fight. It's refreshing to watch him fight. There's so many flat-footed, slow, stuck in the mud, sloppy heavyweight strikers in the heavyweight division. It is nice when I get to watch someone like Diniz that moves well, is technical, has decent footwork, decent boxing. And I think Diniz could be pretty good. So, in terms of how these two match up from a stylistic point of view, just like with Kareem Silva and also Bogdan Guskov, there's not tons of footage available on Diniz. If we look at his record, obviously he's got kickboxing fights mixed in with his MMA fights, and the majority of his MMA fights have ended very, very quickly. So again, like with Guskov, Kareem Silva, we don't know exactly what to expect from Diniz. However, I've watched some of his kickboxing fights, which went deep. His cardio looks pretty good. I know, obviously, MMA cardio, kickboxing cardio, two different things, but there's no major red flags there. Obviously, he's only fought a pretty low level of opponent, so we haven't seen a whole lot of his takedown offense and ground game. So that's obviously a risk factor to bet in Diniz. We have seen a little flash here and there of his takedown offense and ground game in his past fights. Nothing major, but it is positive in the sense that he does appear to do all the correct things and use all the correct technique to deal with takedown threats of his opponents. To be honest with you, Austin Lane's offensive wrestling, ground game, his own takedown offenses, it's all terrible. Austin Lane's grappling as a whole, very, very bad. So I don't think if Diniz had issues on the ground, it would affect him too much in this fight, because I don't think Austin Lane is the kind of fighter to be able to make him pay for any deficiencies he has when it comes to grappling. But obviously these guys coming from a traditional background or traditional striking background are, probably going to be susceptible to having some problems when you run into grapplers, right? We spoke on last week's video about how bad Alex Pereira's takedown offensive and ground game is, and we've seen the same with guys like Stephen Thompson when he runs into a grappler like Belal Muhammad. We've seen Michael Venom Page run into loads of problems against grapplers in Bellator. The list goes on, right? These guys with traditional striking backgrounds usually have pretty bad takedown offense, usually have a pretty bad ground game. because they've dedicated so much of their time to developing that high-level striking skill set, and you can't be great at everything. In time, you can be like an Israel Adesanya that does develop very high-level takedown offensive ground game, but it takes a while, and I would imagine someone like Adesanya, I imagine his takedown offensive ground game wasn't particularly good after just 6 pro fights, so we got to give Diniz time, but there's no major red flags for me in terms of the grappling for this fight because of how bad Lane's grappling is. So, I would expect this to be a stand-up fight. If this is a stand-up fight, clearly favours Diniz. He's a significantly better striker than Lane, in my opinion. Diniz moves well. Good boxing. Tough guy. You know, his chin looked good on the Contender Series. He ate some big shots, but he likes to stand in the pocket and mix it up. He's very technical. Puts a lot of pressure on his opponents. He throws a high volume of strikes for a heavyweight, which is one of the things that I really like about him. Austin Lane is sloppy, low level, bad defensively. He's a big guy who hits very hard. You know, he weighs 240 pounds and is 6'6". He's obviously going to be dangerous on the feet. Most guys with that frame are. But Diniz by far the better striker. And in a stand-up fight, or what is likely to be a stand-up fight, Diniz clearly has the edge. Now, unfortunately, his odds reflect that. He's a pretty big favourite. Personally, I wouldn't feel comfortable betting on a debutant in the heavyweight division that we don't know anything about their takedown offense and ground game against a big, scary guy like Lane that does hit hard. It just doesn't make sense to bet a fighter like Diniz in this odds range. There's just too much risk. You know, the risk-to-reward ratio is not good. I do think Diniz wins this fight. He's my strong lean. Out of all the fighters competing this weekend, I have the most faith in Diniz winning. In terms of, if you said your life depends on betting one of these fighters to win this weekend, who would you go with? I would probably go with Diniz, to be fair. So he is my most confident pick this week, but unfortunately his odds are absolute garbage. And I'm just not interested in betting a heavyweight at big, steep favourite odds. Because Austin Lane's going to hit hard, and you know, maybe Diniz catches him, maybe Diniz isn't as good as I think he is. So it's an easy pass, but I do think Diniz gets the job done. So in terms of the over-under on this one, for me, more than likely this fight ends pretty quickly. The reason being, Diniz is one of these aggressive, high-volume strikers that likes to come forward, take control of the centre of the octagon and force his opponents to engage. Whenever you've got a guy like that doesn't like to take a backward step, quick finishes are always on the table because something's got to give, right? If Diniz is going to constantly engage his opponent, and we know both guys are very dangerous, if Diniz is constantly engaging and there's no safe areas in this fight where the clock could run down and neither guy is going to be in much danger, then pretty likely one of these guys gets knocked out. In terms of, if we know neither guy is really going to look to grapple, we're probably not going to see that much clinch work. If Diniz is initiating striking exchanges constantly with both guys being so dangerous and Lane being quite bad defensively, first round finish for either one of these guys reasonably likely. So, you know, the odds on the under are terrible. I wouldn't bet that, but definitely wouldn't be betting the over on a fight like this either. In terms of the props, I think the most likely outcome is Diniz by knockout or TKO, but the odds are absolutely terrible, so that's an easy pass. I don't really like any of the other props on this matchup, so I would give the props a miss. Alright, now let's break down the next fight on this card, which is going to be Jonathan Pearce against David Onama. Now, I always do this thing that when I first start researching a card, I'll kind of scan through all the matchups and I will pick out names of guys that I think could be potential bets just based on hazy memories. And then I'll prioritize researching those fights first before the odds move too much. And this is one of those cards that when I scanned through it, there weren't that many names jumping out at me as potential bets. But Jonathan Pearce was one of those guys that I thought would potentially be close to free money in this fight. Because, from memory, Pearce was one of these gritty, determined, relentless grapplers. And David Onama was one of these guys that just had no takedown defense and a very low level ground game. So for me, this felt like a very good stylistic matchup for Pearce. So after researching this fight, what I would say is I still lean Pearce. I still pick Pearce to win. I still think Pearce is going to win. But I do think the odds on this fight are pretty much where they should be. As a result, I have no interest in betting it. So if we take a look at the odds, I'll explain what I mean. So Onama is the underdog at average odds are around 2.43, which is going to be plus 143 for an implied probability of 41%. If we take a look at the odds on Pearce, he's around an average of 1.57, which is going to be minus 175 for an implied probability of 64%. So in order to get like a decent margin of value on Pearce here, you've got to be capping him at about 70%, which is a very difficult thing to do. So Pearce is 31 years old, 6 foot tall with a 71-inch reach. David Onama, 29 years old, 5'11", with a 74-inch reach. So both guys roughly the same age, roughly the same size. So this fight is exactly what I described a few moments ago. It's a classic striker versus grappler matchup. Pearce is the grappler, Onama the striker. If the fight stays standing, Onama should light Pearce up very bad, possibly even knock him out and dominate the fight on the feet. If the fight goes to the ground, Pearce should be able to stick to Onama like glue, out-hustle him, grind him down, wear him out, and just use his grappling to dictate where the fight takes place and win using his grappling, right? It's one extreme to the other, this fight. This fight's a really complicated one. I don't even know where to begin. In a nutshell, striker versus grappler, what I've just said is what to expect, right? The outcome of this fight is going to be determined by how much grappling control Pearce can have versus how much success Onama can have in the moments of the fight where Pearce isn't stuck to him like glue. So even though the tail of the tape is pretty similar for these two, there is a real difference in body type and physicality. So Pearce is one of these guys that, generally speaking, can fight at a very high pace, go hard, grapple hard for 3 rounds. And like with a lot of guys that can do this, guys like Ricky Simone, guys like Merab Dvalishvili, a lot of the time, if you've got a fighter that can grapple hard for 3 rounds, generally speaking, the trade-off is that they don't have the most physically imposing ground game. That's usually true. Occasionally you get a unicorn like a Khabib or a Makhachev, but even then Makhachev slowed against Volkanovski. But generally speaking, if you see a guy that can grapple relentlessly, they lack some physicality or some grappling control. We see it with Dvalishvili, right? Dvalishvili can spam takedowns for 15 minutes, 25 minutes, an hour, but he doesn't have the best grappling control. And you really see that with Pearce. He can grapple hard for 3 rounds, but he doesn't have that heavy top game or that crushing physicality, that crushing grappling control. Onama is one of these guys with very bad takedown defense, very weak off his back, very low level ground game. But he's got an abundance of physicality, very athletic, very powerful. And so this enables Onama to get away with not having a particularly good set of skills when it comes to MMA grappling. And you can think of guys like Derek Lewis or Mark Hunt as really good examples of this, right? Where, you know, both Derek Lewis and Mark Hunt were fighters that had extremely bad takedown defense, extremely low-level ground games. But when you look at guys like Mark Hunt or Derek Lewis in their prime time in the UFC, both guys were extremely difficult to hold down when they were fresh. Obviously, we can all think of examples where Hunt against Miocic or Lewis in any number of fights has been held down and beaten up on the ground, but that was generally when they got tired. When they were fresh, Hunt and Derek Lewis virtually impossible to hold down for more than 20-30 seconds. They would literally just get to their knees and stand back up, because both Hunt and Derek Lewis were so strong, it was very, very difficult to hold them down if they didn't want to be held down. And you see a bit of that in David Onama. His takedown offense is awful. His ground game, white belt level, super weak off his back, dreadful on the ground. I don't have anything to say positive about Onama's ground game. But because he's an absolute tank, he's strong, he's powerful, he's athletic, he's very, very difficult to control if he doesn't want to be controlled. And that's what makes this fight interesting, because Jonathan Pearce absolutely has the technique to smother Onama in pressure, the cardio, the grapple relentless for 15 minutes and drag Onama to the ground and beat him up on the ground. But I don't think Pearce has the physicality to keep Onama on the ground unless Onama chooses to be there. And that's really where this fight becomes quite complex, because Onama, similar to Alex Perez in many ways, is one of these guys that does take too long to work through bad positions on the ground. Now, with Alex Perez, I think that's a mental issue, because we know Alex Perez is a very high-level MMA grappler, and we know Alex Perez knows what he should be doing in every position on the ground. He just takes a little bit too long to decide to do it. With Onama, it's different. With Onama, I do think it is a skill issue, where it takes him a long time to work through bad positions on the ground, because he doesn't really know what he's doing. He hesitates a lot. He has to think things through and rely on a little bit of help from his corner at times. But it's the same problem with Onama. He is the kind of guy that can be smothered in pressure. But where this fight gets really interesting is that Jonathan Pearce doesn't really have a style of grappling which will really score that many points or really score big, in the sense that his submission game's not particularly good, so he's not going to get like loads of really nasty deep submission attempts which will score big. His back takes aren't particularly great, so it's not like it's that likely he'll get to Onama's back and then shut the whole round down from back control. His grappling control, his top game's not that heavy, so like I say, if Onama does show a little bit of urgency, he will be able to get back up. And so, even though Pearce is one of these guys that can stick to Onama like glue and spam takedowns and just wet blanket Onama, I don't see a lot that Pearce can really do to leave a big impression on the judges in each of these rounds, because he's not going to be smashing Onama with ground and pound and putting Onama in loads of trouble on the ground. He's going to be outworking him for sure, in the same way we saw Mokaev outworking Alex Perez. But I don't think Pearce is going to achieve all that much, just like Mokaev didn't achieve that much. And the thing about Onama is, he's really, really dangerous on the feet. He's got big power, he's fast, he's explosive, and all that physicality that we've spoken about him having in grappling positions obviously translates into his striking as well, which makes him really dangerous. So Jonathan Pearce is one of these guys who, you know, we've been really critical of Onama's MMA grappling, but we've got to be very critical of Pearce's MMA striking. He doesn't really have any power in his hands. His technique is very bad. Defensively, he's very, very, very bad. He's a bit of a sitting duck on the feet. So on the feet, Onama is for sure going to be lighting him up and totally dominating him and landing big, hard, heavy, mean, impactful shots. And I wouldn't be surprised if Onama knocked Jonathan Pearce out. So this is one of those fights where Pearce is likely to have a lot of grappling control, but not score very much from it and not have much end product. And Onama will probably only get these, you know, odd, fleeting moments of time on the feet to score points, but Pearce is striking so bad and his defense is so bad and Onama is so dangerous on the feet that only just getting a few minutes here and there in striking range could very well be enough for Onama to do enough damage to steal rounds, because there's no doubt that Onama will be the guy doing more damage in this round and in this fight and having the bigger moments. So it's an interesting fight. My lean is still Jonathan Pearce, but I wouldn't bet him at these odds. And I don't feel anywhere near as confident that he's going to win as I did before I researched the fight. My lean on Pearce is based on the fact that Onama does wear a bit as fights wear on, which makes him less dangerous as fights wear on. He's very weak off his back. His takedown defense is bad. So ultimately, Pearce, with his grappling, his better cardio, does have the ability to dictate where the fight takes place. But because his grappling control is not very good, I think Onama can cause him big problems at the beginning of every round, and big problems whenever he's able to work out of bad positions in grappling exchanges and and get back up to his feet. So it's a very interesting fight. I think the odds are probably where they should be. If I really had to bet this fight, I would still take Pearce, but you're not getting a very good risk to reward ratio for your money, so better off being smart and not putting your money in danger here and just passing on this one. So in terms of the over-under on this fight, I wouldn't touch the over-under just because Pearce is so vulnerable on the feet that I think there's a pretty good chance Onama is going to knock him out. My lean would be over 1.5 rounds, but whenever you've got a fight like this where both guys have got extreme advantages in the area that the other is weak, it means that at all times one of these fighters is going to be in really bad positions and at risk of being finished. Pearce isn't particularly dangerous on the ground, but that doesn't change the fact that Onama is very low level on the ground, so it doesn't mean Pearce can't snatch a submission. And then on the feet, Pearce is very vulnerable to a knockout in this fight. So yeah, man, I could see a situation where Onama or Pearce gets knocked out or submitted early, respectively. Obviously, Onama knocking Pearce out, Pearce submitting Onama. But then I could also see a 3-round grueling war of attrition where Pearce just wet blankets Onama, wears him down, sticks to him like glue for 3 rounds, and the fight ends up going over 1.5 rounds or even over 2.5 rounds. Don't have a strong feeling either way, so I won't be betting it. In terms of most likely outcomes, for props, I think you're only going to see 2 outcomes on this fight, in my opinion. I think Pearce will either win a decision, or I think Onama will knock him out. Now, that's not appropriate for me to say. Onama could win a decision as well, actually. Onama could win a decision. And you know what? Those odds are a lot better than they should be. Do you know what? I think that's the best prop, actually, Onama by decision. I'm not going to be betting it myself. I don't like props. But if you want a better prop on this fight, I would take Onama by decision. 7.5, 8.0, plus 650, plus 700. Just based on the fact that if we do get one of those fights where Pearce smothers Onama in lots of pressure, lots of grappling control, sticks to him like glue but doesn't achieve much with grappling, then Onama has these fleeting moments in the fight where he does big damage or scores a knockdown or, cuts Pearce really bad. You can see the judges going Onama in that type of fight, and that's why I think the odds they're all right on this, man. I quite like that prop. There's been some good props on this card, actually. I might actually place some of these props. I haven't placed a prop in a long time. I hate prop bets. I don't really have any interest in them. But might actually place some props on this card. I think I will. Okay. Hope you found that useful. So now let's break down the final fight on this main card, which is going to be Tim the Dirty Bird Means versus Uros Medic. So if we start off by taking a look at the odds on this one, we can see that Medic is the favourite at average odds of around 1.32, which is going to be minus 313 for an implied probability of 76%. If we take a look at the odds on Tim Means, he's around an average of 3.50, which is going to be plus 250 for an implied probability of 29%. We can see that Means is 40 years old, 6'2", with a 75-inch reach. Medic, 30 years old, 6'1", with a 71-inch reach. So some pretty notable X factors on this. First being the age. Tim Means is 10 years older than Medic, and statistically speaking, the younger fighter wins around 70% of the time when there is a 10-year age gap in a fight. So that gives Medic a pretty big statistical advantage over Means. However, when we look at his odds, which are around, where are they? We'll call it 1.32. What is very interesting is that the implied probability on this one is 76%. So even if you did blindly bet the age stat on this fight, this would be a minus EV bet, because you've got to cap Medic, or you've got to give Medic a better than 76% chance of winning in order to get any value here, which you can't do blindly betting on that age stat. We can also see that Tim Means has got a nice 4-inch reach advantage, and unlike Ryan Spann, he knows how to use it. 4-inch reach advantage, pretty notable for a guy like Means because he fights long, very rangy, very technical, does a good job of using his length. One more X factor to take into consideration is that Means has got a lot of miles on the clock. He has close to 50 pro fights, which is an enormous amount of fights. We've seen him rocked, wobbled, dropped, knocked out multiple times in his career. He's taken tons of damage. He's been in loads of wars. He's been in been injured a bunch of times. So Means is a guy with a lot of miles on the clock. Medic with only 11 pro fights has got, just a fraction of the number of fights that Means has had. So he's fresher. Hasn't taken as much damage. He's in a healthier place. And of course, it's not very often you see 40-year-olds win in the UFC, which is one of the reasons why we bet on Norma Dumont to beat Jermaine de Randamie recently. Just one of the reasons why we liked Dumont in that fight. Obviously, she came through for us big on the pre-fight bets. So, yeah, man, how do we see this fight playing out? Well, if the fight stays standing, it's one of those fights where both guys are pretty well matched in the sense that Means is pretty technical, throws a nice diverse range of attacks, throws a high volume of strikes and puts a lot of pressure on his opponents. Medic more of a single shot striker, can't match the volume of Means, but he's more of a sniper that hits a lot harder and, has at this stage, I think, more knockout power than Means. He's just more powerful, more impactful. The real issue I've got with Means at this stage in his career is that he is looking a little bit fragile on the feet. Even in fights that he won, like his last fight against Andre Filho, when you're watching it, you're kind of thinking, man, if Filho could just land one clean, hard shot here, he could probably knock Means out pretty easily. Throughout that fight, Means is looking very fragile, very vulnerable. So Means will be at constant risk of being knocked out in this fight. But I actually think in terms of volume, there's a good chance that Means will outstrike Medic because Medic doesn't throw the volume of strikes that Means does. But 40-year-olds find ways to lose. At this stage in Means' career, he does get rocked, wobbled, dropped, knocked out in most of his fights. And so, with how dangerous of a striker Medic is, it's likely Means gets caught with something in this fight. Now, one thing we always talk about with Tim Means is that he does have a very high level ground game. He's a good MMA grappler, good offensive wrestling, good grappling control. We saw him use a bit of grappling in the Filho fight, not a great deal. The thing with Tim Means is he tends to rush grappling positions. So Tim Means is one of these guys that does a really good job of, getting guys to the ground and beating them up, but then he rushes the position and gives them the space to stand back up. If Means were to come into this fight with a grappling heavy game plan, I think he would win a really good percentage of the time, and I'd actually favour him in this fight. If you said to me, look Chris, I've got a crystal ball, I've seen into the future, I promise you that Means is going to grapple hard this weekend, based on that, what probability do you give him of winning? I'd probably cap him at like 1.50 minus 200. Because if you look at Uros Medic's fight against Oralby, his takedown offense looked very bad, low-level ground game, didn't show any urgency to work through bad positions on the ground. So if Tim Means does come into this fight with a grappling-heavy game plan, he could take Medic down, dominate him on the ground. But I feel we've said this about so many of Tim Means' fights over the last few years, and there's been so many fights where he's had huge advantages over his opponents on the ground, and he's chosen to stand and bang instead and run into trouble. So, we've got to acknowledge that Means has a huge advantage over Medic on the ground, but I doubt he's going to use it, and for that reason, Medic probably will win. I don't have any interest in betting this fight. Medic's issues on the ground are too big for me to ever consider betting him as a big favourite, but at the same time, it's extremely rare that 40-year-olds win in the UFC, so I'm not going to be touching Tim Means. Easy pass for me. In terms of the over-under, definitely wouldn't touch the over-under on this fight. This is one of those fights where, both guys are dangerous. You see, if you look at Tim Means' fights, a lot of his fights end inside the distance, some don't. Most of Medic's fights end very quickly. I could see a longer war of attrition in this matchup. I could see a very quick finish where someone gets brutally knocked out in round one. So I'm not interested in the over-under on this fight. In terms of the props, if you really, really, really want a better prop on this fight, there's no props I like or love. But I think the best one, the best prop with the best risk to reward, which isn't necessarily the most likely bet to hit. If you're asking me what is the most likely bet to hit, it would be Medic by knockout or TKO, but the odds are terrible. If you ask me what prop has the best risk to reward ratio, I'd probably say Means to win by knockout or TKO for a couple of reasons. Means is a pretty dangerous striker. I don't think it's that likely Means straight up knocks Uros Medic out on the feet. But there are other ways in which this bet can cash. If Means does use a grappling heavy game plan and puts Medic in a bad position on the ground, he could get a stoppage through ground and pound, which would classify as a technical knockout, and in which case a win by, knockout, a bet on knockout or TKO for Tim Means would win. Also, we do know that Medic has slowed down in the past against Jalen Turner and Oralby. So if he slows against Means, who we know has very good cardio, Means could get a stoppage just through Medic being too tired to defend himself. So that's not bad either. Means by knockout or TKO. So, I hope you found that breakdown useful. If you did, check out the links below. Get to my website. Join our community where you can find breakdown videos for every other fight on this card and every UFC fight ever. If you like these breakdowns, you want to watch breakdown videos from my prelims or the prelim matchups, just go to the links below. Check out my website. It's still under construction. I don't get time to work on a website. I'm too busy betting on football, too busy researching UFC fights and betting on UFC fights. Betting's my priority. Making money from sports is my priority. My website is secondary, which means we're almost 6 months into developing a new website and it's nowhere near finished. I'll get there eventually, but bread and butter is making money from betting on sports. That's what I prioritize. You can still sign up, still join the community, still do all that through my website. If you get stuck, just contact me. I'll give you the links on where to join certain things. Yeah, man. Thanks for watching. Hit the like button if you haven't already. Subscribe if you haven't already. Love you all, guys. Nice one, guys. Take care. See you all next week. Bye.